Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Jeremy Sadler. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at Cyber Trust Alliance. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us for this first session in our new series, Ask the Experts. We'll be hosting this monthly to present key industry partners discussing key industry topics and give you, our customers, partners, or vendors a chance to ask us any questions you might have about your compliance journey, questions related to hot topics, key issues, or just things you're dealing with on your end. With that, here with me today, we have Jeremy Molnar. Jeremy comes from leadership positions in audit and compliance. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Jeremy Molnar, been in cybersecurity for a little over 20 years, doing mostly consulting in healthcare for probably the last 16, 17 years. And just looking forward to talking about patch management.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to have you here today. So today we're here to talk about patch management. And on the surface, this may seem like a really lame topic. But when you consider some of the recent headliner breaches, it's totally avoidable by simple software patching. It's a very worthwhile conversation. Please feel free to enter any questions you might have into the chat. We'll monitor and pull those into conversation as we go to ensure throughout our discussions we're addressing everybody's needs. Again, those don't have to be pertaining to today's conversation. This conversation is really just to help enlighten and educate and train everybody on some of the ongoings in the industry. This particular round is on patch management. With that being said, everyone knows patch management's at a basic level, right? All of our IT guys, even our compliance guys, right? We tend to know a little bit about what it at least encompasses. Generally, we think of it as patch automation, Windows. We think of Windows update services. We think of some of the third-party tools that are out there that help us to automate or manually manage that through validating missing updates on our machines, right? But managing software vulnerabilities goes far beyond Windows. In the modern business landscape, even Windows shops have way more than just Windows software to manage and update in their environments these days. So, Jeremy, maybe you'd like to chat with me a little bit. What else are we missing here? What else should we be looking for and considering in our environment to make sure that we're really covering ourselves from a software vulnerability position?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to a lot of organizations and you ask them kind of about their patch management processes, to your point, often what they're talking about is, Patch Tuesday, and we patch our Windows systems. And, when you really start to dig into what that means for them, that's really all they're patching, right? They might generally do a very good job of hitting all of their workstations. Servers generally are a little bit more manual, which often creates its own problems. Anytime you have manual processes, you're likely to miss things. You reliant on checklists, which, let's be honest, most of us don't really have good checklists either. And so we really have to look at kind of what it is that we need to patch within our environment, which means have a good asset inventory. What systems are actually out there? What all do we need to patch? What applications are on those systems? And that's just, really covering the system side of things when you're talking workstations and servers. That gets us into, other types of devices that are in the environment, which I know you have plenty of experience. Today, everything's connected, which it makes it very interesting. Even my car has to get patched periodically. So things like that, you really have to consider. I don't know if you want to talk about kind of your experience with Biomed. I can talk about mine, but that's kind of its own unique problem as well. In that often when you start talking to people, okay, who's patching this system? On the Biomed side, they're pointing at IT saying IT patches it, right? On the IT side, they're pointing back to Biomed. No, Biomed patches it, right? And then those types of situations often present themselves as well, where maybe we do actually know everything we have a plan. We're not really sure who's actually going to fix those types of problems. So there's a lot of different things that come into play, but definitely want to look at, understanding what do we have, and then do we have a plan, a proactive plan in place for each of those? Are we looking at patching them quarterly? I even talk to network guys all the time. I just want to know that you're looking at patches maybe quarterly, even once a year would be great, versus the mindset of, well, we'll patch it when it's broken, right? Which is kind of the mindset.
Absolutely. Well, we see that a lot, right? And we forget about some of the things that we take for granted in IT on a regular basis that needs to be inventoried and considered along with those, right? I'm excited that you mentioned biomed. That's a big one that tends to fall through the cracks, right? Who owns biomed, right? In a facility is usually a question that not everybody has a fast answer for. A lot of times it's the medical side of the facility that owns those devices, but are they owning the management and maintenance of those devices, or are they relying on the vendor, and are they following up with that vendor to make sure those updates are happening on a regular basis, even if they're not capable of executing those updates themselves, right? So there's a lot of interesting things that customers and clients and vendors can be doing together in concert to make sure that we're covered and that we're taking care of our devices, right? And then of course you mentioned those IoT devices, and we start to think about all the nuances in IT that we tend to be accountable to deploy, right? They ask us to come in and set these things up, and as we're setting these things up, are we tracking them? Are we managing them? Are we recording that deployment somewhere in a way that we know we're going to be able to track and manage that device is being kept up to date on a regular basis, right? And of course, good IT shops, we cover our routers and our switches and our access points. But how often are we looking at those other smart devices or those other IoT and connected devices? And then sometimes I find frequently that we will slip on some of the bigger things that you think we should have covered, like our hosts, right? And how often we're keeping our host software up to date when we're running now these new virtual environments, maybe not so new anymore, but just because of the heavy lift involved usually in updating those hosts, right? And the higher degree of risk involved. And it's not always as easy, but again, one of the things I like to recommend to people is that anytime you're connecting something to your network, you're accepting a responsibility to manage and maintain and inventory that item. And you've got to make sure you understand the repercussions of that commitment or that responsibility, and are willing to carry it through. That's a great start. And, I think it'll really help to highlight the importance here through some newsworthy breaches that were caused through third-party software or systems in the past. I think everybody would readily recognize the Kaseya breach not that long ago, caused by a third-party plugin that was reportedly already patched at the time of the breach. And then they released a few other emergency updates and additional patches to help expedite the remediation process. Also, the Experian breach of 2017, right, caused by an unpatched Apache web server that there was a patch for that was exploited. So there's some real credible risk, right, related to leaving these third party, whether it's third party software, third party hardware, third party integration points, even, right? We have to start thinking about if it's not necessarily something we're plugging in, but something that we're connecting to that's plugged in somewhere else, and suddenly there's this minefield of management that we've got to track, and so what are your thoughts, Jeremy? Do you have any guidance, any advice, any tricks or tools that you've observed over the years, wins or value that you've seen other people succeed with that maybe you would give to our listeners?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of it does come down to basics. I mean, you could even look at, anytime CISA releases a notification to, hey, someone's targeting you, here are things you need to worry about, and here are the things you should be doing. Patch management's always on that list. And I think, it gets back to looking at kind of the basic frameworks for security of understand what you have. So that asset inventory, how do we really manage that? It can be manual. Obviously, the larger the organization gets, the harder it is. And you really need to start looking at tools. There's plenty of tools out there today that can really help identify what types of systems in your environment. There's some that will monitor the network to identify them. There's some that allow you to create barcode scans. Like, there's all kinds of options as it relates. That first step is really helpful in understanding what do we have, what do we need to build a plan around, and then that gets back to define a proactive plan. And be realistic with your resources. I know everyone has resource issues. Every client I've ever talked to says we don't have enough people. That's never changed in the 20 years I've been doing this. It's not going to change tomorrow. So the way you deal with that is hopefully you have technology that really helps you solve that problem. At least on the Windows side, and for the majority of the major applications, there are plenty of options to help you really manage what do we have and how do I push or really manage those patches of the systems. Even better, they have systems that will say you have this version of Apache, that version is missing these critical patches. So it tells you exactly what you need to focus on, and where you need to spend your energy. So definitely recommend taking advantage of those if resources are an issue. Then start really prioritizing what are the bigger issues. I joked about the networking guys don't ever necessarily like to patch their systems. Oftentimes there's a big reason for that. If they patch your system and it breaks and it takes down large chunks of the network, obviously that's a very big problem. So that's one of things where from a prioritization standpoint, they really need to look at the patches, but they do need to make those decisions and document, we're not going to patch for these reasons, so that they can really understand, it's a bigger priority for us to hit Apache or those things that are more targeted than maybe some internal switches that they can't be. But start developing those plans for tracking what we're doing, show where you're making the decisions. And really, just a reminder for everyone, you can't do everything overnight, right? So a lot of it is simply your ability to track and recognize we may be pushing things or kicking that can down the road. That's okay, as long as we understand why we're doing that and show that, hey, things like Heartbleed, when it happens, we all lose a lot of sleep, and we spend the next week or two trying to find, where is this in my network? Do I need to patch open SSL? Maybe I don't have it. Great, I can go to sleep, right? But then that gets us to things like Log4j, which that gets now to a new problem of we don't even know where it is in our environment, right? Because the application providers don't know if they used it or not. So now we're sitting here, we're going to patch where we know it does, but now it has the long legs of, now we just need to keep really on top of what do we have? And if someone does come out with the patch, how do we know? Like, how are we alerted to that? And then how do we then take action at that point? And a lot of that is going to be the technology side. You want something that, you don't want to create a bunch of email lists where your 15 million vendors all send you an email to alert you to update. You want a system that can really tell you, these are the patches that you're missing. These are the critical ones. That way you can really help prioritize and make the right decisions.
Thank you, Jeremy. That you bring up so many great points. I don't even know where to start right now on those. I love that you opened up or started in with a reference to kicking that can down the road, right? And that you can't do everything overnight. And I think that's really summarizes well the intent behind the SIBO risk management platform and our approach to compliance and security, right? That you can't do everything overnight. And likewise, most regulatory organizations don't expect you to have everything done overnight, right? They expect you to have a plan and they expect you to execute against that plan. That compliance is a journey, and likewise security is a journey, right? And I want to make sure and differentiate those two things, right? So they're not necessarily one and the same. Sometimes you can glean some accidental security through pursuing compliance, right? But security really is an intentional effort that requires those layers and that process, right? And that ongoing process of identifying weaknesses. Log4j is a big one. Obviously a new one that we're all kind of scratching our head on still, trying to figure out if, how many devices, both IoT, smart devices, those, SANs and NASs that might have various web-based features built into them, running Apache on the back end, because that's one of the big predominant lightweight web front ends of choice for most vendors these days. And how many of those are running the Log4j back end, and just takes to a whole new level of the kinds of inventory that I don't even know would ever really be achievable, especially by smaller and mid practices. But certainly important to be able to go back then later and evaluate your environment, right? Which is again one of the pinnacles of both the security and compliance expectations in the industry today, right? That we have the ability that as we find these new risks to our environment and to our data, that we're able to then go back and reevaluate our environment to identify where those risks might jeopardize our data and or our systems. Excellent. So great points all around. Jeremy, I want to thank you for your time today. We're super short on time. I want to go ahead and open up the floor for questions from anybody. I haven't seen anything posted in chat yet. Of course, it's right after the holidays, and I'm sure everybody's busy trying to get caught up from downtime. But for those that took the time to join us today, if anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to post them into chat. And while we're waiting on that, Jeremy, was there any parting comments? Any thoughts you might want to share with our listeners? Any advice related to patch management or otherwise?
Sure. While we're waiting on potential questions, I would also kind of expand what we were talking about to, really look at kind of cloud environments and understand, I think a lot of the issues that happen with cloud relate to kind of what we already talked about, the not a clear understanding of ownership. So is you do look to rely more on the cloud, which is great. I think it adds a lot of benefits from a security standpoint. Just really make sure you understand your responsibilities and the vendor's responsibilities as it relates to what they're providing. If we're talking about patch management, what is it that they're willing to patch, right? They might patch the infrastructure side, they might not patch anything, and it's all on you. So just make sure that that's part of that, because I think a lot of people lose that, understanding that just because you move it to cloud doesn't mean that it's still not your problem. Third parties would be another situation, and you brought up Kaseya. I think it's a good thing to understand really those relationships in what it is your third parties are doing. For anyone that's been in security a long time, I think we all understand that generally when you ask me a question about my security program, my best answer is don't pay attention what's behind the curtain, right? If something bad happens, you'll know. And that's unfortunately, I think that has not helped any of us. I think as it relates to I think being helpful to each other. So almost all of us rely on third parties today. If you can build those relationships with your third parties and have open conversations around what they're doing, what problems they have, same on your side, you can help each other. And hopefully, when things do go badly, those contexts will, you'll be notified more quickly. You'll be able to work together better to solve those types of issues. Kaseya impacted a lot of organizations, and you want to be able to, hopefully be able to take quicker action on that, so that, someone else's lack of patching doesn't impact you negatively either. It's great you patched, now your third party just caused a breach for you, right? So you want to definitely take inventory of that and manage that as well.
Absolutely. Excellent points. And I'll actually add to that. You talk a lot about the understanding what your vendors are doing for you and what you're doing, and how, and it's important that you understand how those two entities work in concert, right? How your efforts are going to affect your vendor, how your vendor's efforts are going to affect you. One of the things I see a lot in the industry is a lack of ownership or responsibility from the organization to push for that level of management between their local teams and their vendors, right? I find a lot of smaller organizations in particular rely on their vendors to provide for them certain security services without wrapping any management around that, right? Without having any documentation or policies that stipulate what it is the vendor's doing versus what it is they're doing. And so they're just kind of trusting that everything's as it needs to be, which can lead to unfortunate results in some cases. So I always encourage everybody, even if you've got a vendor that's providing services for you, it is absolutely imperative that you understand and document what your expectations are from that vendor, what the vendor's commitments are to that relationship. Because ultimately, whether it be the unfortunate event of a breach or an industry audit or otherwise, the responsibility always rests with the organization to make sure that due diligence is being pursued and followed. But I want to thank you, Jeremy, for your time today and for your thoughts on our topic. Today was a great discussion on patch management.